So Fiona, why did you decide to study ethnobotany?
That's an interesting question. I think I've always been an ethnobotanist. I just didn't know what it was called. I grew up partly in the bush with my parents homesteading in a small diddy-dot village site called Klaus, which is now in it's in the middle of the Pacific Rim National Park Reserve, so the West Coast Trail, and was very fortunate to spend quite a bit of time with people there. And I also lived in England, and my grandparents lived in the countryside. So both of those places very involved with plants. Lucky to spend a lot of time outdoors as a kid and harvesting things. And I've always been interested in people and plants, and that is the study of ethnobotany.
What kind of classes do you have to take to become an ethnobotanist?
Oh, well, it was kind of a circuitous route. I think it's one of those cases where I've always loved plants, but I never took them seriously as something that I could do as a career. It was always something I was passionate about, and it was a hobby, but it was too much fun to be serious, if you know what I mean. I now know better. I now know it's really important to work with plants. So I did my undergrad at UVic in French and Environmental Studies, and my mum, who's British and very practical, said, what sort of a job are you going to get with that? And the response that came out of my mouth was, I'm going to be a bilingual conservationist. And you know what? I've never had to look for work. I've always had more work than I can deal with. And then I went on to graduate studies. I did a master's degree in environmental design at the University of Calgary, and I look at co-management, so shared management of forest resources. And I worked with the Métis Woodland Cree community in Beauval, Saskatchewan for that. And most of the way through my degree, looking at forest co-management, I was offered a place to do a Master's of Science in Environmental Change at Oxford University in England, and that was such a good opportunity. So I went and did that concurrently with the Calgary Masters, and I looked at carbon sequestration and the problem of what we now call leakage in carbon sequestration forestry.
And when did you get back to the Vancouver Island?
So then I came back to Victoria and started teaching at the University of Victoria. So I've taught there since 1999 in the School of Environmental Studies and with continuing studies. And I teach mostly the ethnobotany class, but also traditional systems of land and resource management. And I also teach ethnobotany at the Bamfield Marine Sciences Centre. And in 2014, I started my PhD with Dr. Nancy Turner, who's a very well known and respected ethnobotanist, looking at how First Peoples cultivated gardens prior to European contact, and specifically berry gardens. We have a lot of not only linguistic, but archaeological and ethnobotanical evidence that people did cultivate landscapes quite highly here.
Have you finished your PhD?
I started it, and then with my stepdad getting Alzheimer's and with COVID and this incredible interest in seed, I decided that it was a bit selfish to be doing my PhD at this point, and I needed to focus on family commitments and also focus on helping people to grow food in these extraordinary times.
So yes, that's where I want to go next, because you are a trained academic and teacher, so when did you decide to become a farmer and specialize in seeds?
I've always been interested in growing things and farming, even when I lived in apartments or shared houses with friends. I've always had a small garden, even if it's a pot on a patio. And there was an opportunity that came up when a longtime family friend, Bob Mitchell, approached my then partner, John, and myself. We were looking at land up island, actually, and Bob approached us and said he was interested in having a family take over part of his farm, which we ended up deciding to do, and that was back in 2004. At first, with two small children, I wasn't growing a lot, but eventually I started growing produce for high-end restaurants, and then John and I separated amicably, and I bought him out of the farm and stayed here. And at that point, I really had to choose to farm as a more of a full-time occupation if I was going to stay here. So I did. And again, I really expanded growing produce for high-end restaurants. And then I was doing my seed orders one winter, and my favorite variety of spinach disappeared from the 3 catalogs that I generally order from at the same time in Canada. So at that point it was West Coast Seeds, William Dam, and Vessey's. And I phoned each of the companies and said, hey, I see you stopped growing this variety. When do you think you might grow it again? It's a really good variety for coastal BC. And I was quite surprised when each of them fessed up that they didn't actually grow a single seed crop. So as an organic farmer, that was a surprise to me. I naively assumed that each of these big companies, or seed houses really, were growing what they were selling. And looking back on it now, it's the equivalent of someone walking into Canadian Tire and naively assuming that every product that's for sale in that large, diverse store was actually manufactured by Canadian Tire. And some of these large seed companies have what I would call quite a bit of disingenuous advertising and publicity, where it makes it look like they're growing seed crops. They don't lie outright and say that they are, but as a customer, you certainly have the strong impression that they do.
Absolutely. And so how did you react about this absence of availability of the spinach seeds? What did you do about it?
I realized that there were 3 or 4 things that were a mainstay to the produce that I was growing, that if I did lose those varieties, I wouldn't be able to grow those anymore. So I started saving my own seeds, just in a very casual way to start. And the more that I learned about genetic health, inbreeders versus outbreeder population. Inbreeder populations like tomatoes need much smaller numbers of plants to maintain genetic health. Outbreeders like kale, for example, or chard need a much larger population. So suddenly I had, a kilogram of kale seed and I only needed a small handful. So I also did a shift around that time from growing produce to growing plant starts. And how that happened was I had a second child. And when you have one child or you're pregnant, it's fairly easy to drive into town with a truckload of produce and deliver to different restaurants. You have one like you're still pregnant, and then the other child's in a backpack and you can carry a crate. But once you have 2 kids, 2 pretty active boys, it's impossible to do deliveries in town. So I had this kind of epiphany, I suppose a kind of the biblical parable of if you give someone a bucket of fish, you feed them for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, you feed them for life. So I thought, when I'm selling produce to high-end restaurants, that's all and dandy, but I'm not really helping to feed a lot of people. So I started growing plant starts and going to Seedy Saturdays and selling plant starts and teaching people, giving them advice on how to grow their own food garden. Fast forward a little bit, I'm now saving seeds. I've got way too many, and I have this epiphany of I'd like to sell these rather than just compost them or give them away. And I sat there one night before a Seedy Saturday and wrote out 500 envelopes, just brown coin manila envelope, like little small ones, with cilantro, kale, lettuce, chard, all the seeds that I had been saving. And then I just put seeds into the envelopes, licked them shut, and sold them all over the course of the Seedy Saturdays that spring. And that really surprised me, because that was 500 seed packages with very scribbly chicken scratch handwriting on them. So then I had the thought that, okay, you teach someone how to fish. What if their equipment breaks? What if they don't have a net or a hook anymore? And I think that's a good analogy with seeds, because a lot of people don't even think about seeds, much less have the skill set to grow seeds or dry them and store them. And I think it's a big problem, because we really have no food security without seed security.
You started with very few seeds, and how did you decide which seeds to grow?
I think the honest truth is it just kind of happened. when you go to Seedy Saturdays and there's a seed exchange table, or you walk around all the different vendors, if you look at a seed catalog, there's so many tempting options. And as an ethnobotanist and a farmer, it was just really hard to say no to some of these, especially tomatoes. There's so many different varieties of tomatoes. Also, a longtime friend and mentor of mine, Carolyn Harriet, had one of the original local seed growers here in British Columbia, and she had a company called The Garden Path and Seeds of Victoria in Victoria. And when she retired from that, she gifted me a lot of the genetics. So some of the varieties that we grow are still carried on from the ones that Caroline grew for 25 years in the Victoria area.
So Fiona, you are a certified organic farm. You are selling organic seeds. But I wonder, when you buy a vegetable that is organic, that is labeled organic, does that mean all the time that the seed is organic too?
So what that means is, so there are different standards for organic. There's different certification. There's the Canadian Standards Association, the CSA. There's national standards like that. And then there's smaller certification bodies. I can answer that question in terms of the Island Organic Producers Association, IOPA, which is our certifier here. And as a farmer, if you're growing produce, you have to look for organic seed first. So the farmer has at least tried to get organic seed, and you have to demonstrate that. One of the problems is that the supply of organic seed is actually quite limited, especially for specific varietals. The other problem, and I think this is even a deeper problem, is that you cannot find generally good quality Canadian grown organic certified seed. And I gave the analogy earlier of going into Canadian Tire and naively assuming as a consumer, as a customer, that everything grown in that store was manufactured by, everything sold in that store is manufactured by Canadian Tire. There is another analogy that I like to use, and that is that if you go into a grocery store as a customer, you have the right to know what the nutritional content is of the food that you're buying, when it was produced, when the best buy date is, where it was produced, and sometimes even how it was produced. There is nothing equivalent for that in seeds, and there should be.
The first time I met you, you told me about this crazy statistic that Canada imports, I think 94 or 97% of its vegetable seeds. Is it correct?
So this statistic came from Seed Change, which is an organization in Eastern Canada, which used to be USC Canada. So very well respected, good quality research, and with assistance from the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian seed security, and now some support from different levels of government. They are, and farm folk, city folk here in British Columbia, they are looking at the situation in Canada's seed supply, and some research published by them shows that 97% of the vegetable seed grown in a year in Canada is imported.
Which is insane when you think about it, because it means that there is no food autonomy for Canada, as you're saying.
It means that you can have small and large farms from coast to coast to coast in Canada, and we have no food security. It's an illusion.
It gets to me because, as you were saying, people don't understand that to grow food you need seeds. What can we do about this?
There's also an associated lack not only of skill set, but of awareness. And in fact, we are so separated as citizens in Canada from our seed supply that for most people, they don't even know what they don't know. And that to me is even more worrying. It's just not even on the radar.
Let's talk about genetic diversity, because you are working a lot on nurturing the seeds that you already have, but also you are working with native population to regrow those plants or create new sorts of seed. Am I right?
Yeah, so we grow, Caroline gifted us, I guess, about 25 or 30 different seed varieties originally. We now grow over 260 varieties. And one of the things that we do here is we actually create new genetic food seed varieties. So some statistics that I think are quite sobering is it's been estimated in North America that in the last 100 years, we've lost about 94% of our food seed varieties. So that information comes from Seed Savers Exchange in the US and Seeds of Diversity here in Canada. And globally, during the same time period, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, the UNFAO, estimates that the loss of food seed diversity has been about 75%. So that is statistically significant. The fact that as a plant grower and breeder today in Canada, I have access to 6% of the genetics that are North American genetics of someone doing my job 100 years ago, and that globally we only have 25% left of what we had 100 years ago. That's pretty sobering, and I would say even catastrophic when you're looking at the challenges that our agriculture and our social systems face today, whether it's extreme weather events, salinization of soils, the supply chain issues that we've experienced throughout the pandemic. They are significant. And I think more than ever right now, it's really critically important for different bioregions to start growing at least some of their seed again. The reality is that some seed crops are very fussy. So spinach, for example, has a pretty narrow biogeoclimatic requirement of where you can grow it as a seed crop. As a leafy crop, it grows extensively, but to actually grow that plant so it produces a healthy and robust seed crop, it's pretty limited. Here in Metchosin, we're really lucky. We're a temperate Mediterranean climate in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains in the US. So we are able to grow seed varieties here that are hugely diverse that many other areas in Canada wouldn't be able to grow. And spinach is a prime example of that.
Why genetic diversity is so important?
I think the answer to that is resilience. That we are so vulnerable to climate change, to these extreme weather events. We grow a lot of food in Canada, but a lot of it is large commodity for export, so grain, for example. And we've also got a lot of international supply chain issues, which honestly, with the war in Russia and with more extreme weather events, I think it would be very wise of us in Canada to really start looking at how we can be more self-sufficient in our food needs. And of course, most of that starts with seed.
Fiona, from what I understand, working on the genetics of local seeds will help the plants to adapt to climate change, right? With the less water availability, the warmer weather.
Or even flooding. I mean, look at what happened in the Lower Mainland, in the Fraser Valley last winter with the 3 atmospheric rivers that came through. A lot of that agricultural land was completely underwater for well over a month. So I think just weather extremes in general. And for that, you need more genetic diversity within your food system, and you also need more diversity in the skill set of the people who are growing that food. So some farmers saving seed, some local seed farms. And for that really to be successful, you've also got to look at a quality standard for the seed that is being produced. A lot of the small seed that's grown across Canada is good seed, but it is not germination tested in a standard way. It's not tested for purity of the seed, not only for genetics, but in, say, weed seeds that might be contaminating it for being disease-free, etc. So part of the challenge is, there's many challenges. Part of the challenge as a small seed grower is there's this false equivalency between what we do here at Metchosin Farm and what seed is offered from the large Canadian seed houses. And because customers looking at our seeds don't necessarily see a difference in what's being offered. And the cost to grow local seed, certainly in southern British Columbia, is very high. You've got very expensive land, expensive labor, insurance, liability, organic certification, et cetera, et cetera. And as a fairly small farm, we're just 10 acres and we've got about 3 acres under full production. We don't get the bulk discounts that the big growers do when they order in fertilizer or landscape fabric, remay, anything like that, pots, trays. But we're too small to be we're too big to just be using pots, trays, and things that are recycled from somewhere else. So the economic reality of growing seeds on a small scale in Canada is pretty tough. In fact, I don't know any seed farms that are just a seed farm. They're all doing something else.
That's my next question. It seems really rare to dedicate a farm to only seeds and plant starter.
Yeah, and it's a tough market to compete in. And so something that I think we really need moving forward is a way for customers, and I'm not saying consumers on purpose. I really, I don't know when the words customer or even citizen disappeared from our lexicon in Canada, but you hear consumer, consumer, consumer all the time. And if you look up the definition of a consumer in the dictionary, it's not actually that nice. So I like to use the word customer, and I like to use the word citizen. Customers need a way to differentiate locally grown Canadian seed to that they're buying from the large seed houses. It's again that analogy of people going into somewhere like Canadian Tire and naively assuming that every product in that store was manufactured by Canadian Tire. I feel that people feel the same way when they go and buy seeds from the big seed companies. They don't understand that what they're buying is not being grown by that company. There are a couple of exceptions. They're both in the U.S. So Johnny's Selected Seeds in Maine and High Mowing Seeds in Vermont both grow a significant portion of what they sell. And they also control the genetics of that. And we don't have anything that's equivalent in Canada. It's a huge gap in our foods and seed system.
Talking about the challenge of a farm like yours, which is small scale, only dedicated to seeds, the issue is that you have to rely on the community to get help with the labor-intensive work that is seed farming. Do you like this aspect?
Yeah, it is a big part of living in a community and supporting your community. And during the pandemic, our definition of who our community is has expanded in ways that we could not have anticipated. We have shipped in the last 2.5 years from this farm, all 100% grown at this farm. We don't resell anything. We've shipped 46,000 seed packages out of here since the pandemic started. That is an incredible amount of food that we helped people grow all across the country. We've had orders from the Yukon, from the Maritimes, even from Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's just been a privilege to get to know some of these new customers. And locally here, yes, we do have a number of people who've volunteered with us, certainly since the pandemic started. And it's been interesting because things that we consider a job like packaging the seeds, we have friends who've been packaging now for us for 2.5 years who say that we saved their mental health during COVID. They had something to do that was productive when they were in lockdown. They felt that they were helping to support something that was really valuable in helping other people grow food. And
For what I understand, seed farming requires very specific skill sets. And also you have volunteers to help you. But after spending a week with you, I don't feel that this situation is sustainable because you have to train people again and again. And it's really time consuming for you. Am I right?
I think that's a really important point, that here we are as a seed farm, which is a critical part of Canada's food security. Yet we do rely on volunteers to a degree to help us do some of these tasks. It's simply not economically viable to run a small seed farm in Canada, certainly in British Columbia in the current conditions. And we struggle with that. We have 2 full-time and 1 part-time employee at the farm as our staff who are just critical. And we have an $80,000 payroll now before we even make a mortgage payment or buy our inputs. So the economic reality of growing seeds here is really tight. I still do off-farm work as an ethnobotanist and in the TV and film industry as a survivalist to keep this afloat. And you honestly would have to be a bit crazy to start growing seeds on a small scale in Canada, yet this is absolutely what we need. So we need to find these efficiencies, we need to find these systems, we need to keep supporting like Seed Change and Farm Folk City Folk and Bauta are doing in terms of educating farmers about how to grow seeds and other people. They've got lots of how-to videos and things. The resources that are available now are significantly better than they were even 5 years ago. So I think it's a great time to think about growing seeds if you're a farmer or wanting to get into farming. And we take our mentoring role in that very seriously. We do help a number of people who are starting to grow seeds, and we give them our accounting system, our seed crop record sheets. Because if I'd had even half of the systems that I have in place now, if I'd known about those or had them when I started growing seeds here 15 years ago, I would be so much further ahead right now.
I know also you spend quite some time to teach kids about seeds. Tell me about it. Do you like it? Do they like it?
So we do take our role of educating the public about seeds and raising this conversation of seeds at a provincial and national and regional level quite seriously at the farm. We invest in it quite a bit. One of the things that we've started doing in the last year is actually having school tours come by and doing hands-on learning around, what is a wet or a dry seed crop? Test your seed knowledge. If we hand around samples of, say, carrot or beet or spinach, no one has any idea what those plants look like in the stage of growth where they're setting seed. So our seed literacy is really low, and we're starting to do more education around that. And we find that the response is actually excellent. People really are, I could risk a pun and say that they're hungry for that kind of experience and knowledge. One of the other things that we're doing, because customers have a hard time telling our seeds apart from more industrial seeds, and this goes for all other small seed growers too. So we've been looking for a way to uplift and support seed growing as a whole, not just our farm. And we've come up with this concept that we're calling Canadian craft seed. So this craft seed is kind of a fusion, I guess, of VQA, which is Vintner Quality Assurance in British Columbia around the wine industry, lessons learned from getting a quality standard for British Columbia wine, and the craft beer movement. We did some farm research too on each of those products to come up with these things. So the idea about craft seed is it is a designation where a customer, if they see the craft seed logo, they know that that seed was 100% grown at this point in British Columbia. And we're working with the provincial government and the Ministry of Agriculture to move this concept forward.
What do you wish for the months to come for seed awareness, for the farm and for yourself?
A day off?
Well, that's a reality.
You know what? I'd love even half a day off. I'd be happy with that right now. Yeah, because the pressures are pretty relentless. And now we have employees to look after, schools that are coming with tours. So it's a lot. But it's a good life, so I'm not complaining. In terms of the farm for the coming year, I'm looking forward to increasing our efficiencies, increasing our automated systems like the drip irrigation that we're putting in. We're moving to a no-till system in the main field garden with permanent beds. It's a lot of work to put it in, but I'm really looking forward to growing in that system next year where we're not tilling the soil up. And I think it will make us more resilient in the face of the flooding and the more extreme heat that we're getting in climate change. I'm looking forward to moving the British Columbia Canadian Craft Seed Initiative forward as a way to help all seed growers in Canada, well, certainly in BC at this point, to differentiate their product. And yeah, I'm looking forward to working with my farm team again this year. With Shannon and Jesse and Leticia and Dan, we're a good group, and we all know that what we're doing is really important.